Let's talk about Fred Below. He began playing with Little Walter in the early 50s. He was a graduate of the Roy C. Knapp School of Drumming. If you don't know about Roy's school, you've got to look into it. His roster of past students included Davy Tuff, Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich, Baby Dodds, Big Sid Catlett, Louis Belson, Fred Below, Buddy Harmon, Shelly Manne, Ed Shaughnessy, Hal Blaine, and Mel Torme, among others. Although Fred had a tough time figuring out the style at first, and threatened to quit his gig because of it, he was responsible for creating much of the rhythmic structure of Chicago blues, especially its backbeat. He's credited as being the first drummer to use a snare backbeat in his playing. He began developing some of the sounds we're accustomed to hearing in rock and roll, like heavy reverb on the drums on the 1952 song She's All Right. Check out the track I'm Ready from around 1954 for the first use of ride cymbal and snare backbeat on 2 and 4 in that style. This Muddy Waters band lineup with Fred Below, Little Walter, and the Myers Brothers is thought by many people to be the band that paved the way for what would become rock and roll. Heavy drums, backbeats, amplifiers, all of the components were there. Some notable tracks to check out besides the ones I've already mentioned would be Wang Dang Doodle by Howlin' Wolf from around 1960. An album with a great compilation of Howlin' Wolf tracks is Blues from Hell. It has this song on it. As well as I'm Your Hoochie Coochie Man by Muddy Waters from 1954. Crazy great drum sounds. Next up is Dick Richards. In 1955, Richards was part of the first group to ever achieve official superstar rock world status. The group was the Comets. Their song Rock Around the Clock skyrocketed them to success and helped to establish rock as a worldwide phenomenon. The first rock song to hit #1, first rock record to be used in a movie, and is still to this day regarded as one of the all-time great rock anthems. It brought together the sound, energy, and magic that would become rock and roll. Richards grew up in a suburb of Philly listening to the drummers of the swing era. Louis Belson was a huge influence. The Comets were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2012. Check out his playing on the album Rock Around the Clock by the Comets. Great tunes like Rock Around the Clock, Rock a Beatin' Boogie, and Shake, Rattle, and Roll. Now we've got one of my personal favorites, Earl Palmer. This guy. One of my faves. Member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, raised in the Treem district of New Orleans, often considered to be the architect of rock and roll drumming. Earl played on some of the most influential and important rock recordings of all time. On top of that, he was the guy that invented many of the rock drum grooves and fills modern rock drummers take for granted. Credited as being the first drummer to play straight 8th grooves. Check out Little Richard's early stuff. Cool little fact, Palmer said Richards used to go in between swung and a straight feel. He wasn't the best piano player, but the energy and the character was there. Palmer would adjust to him, never quite going to heavy swing, but kind of in the cracks there, somewhere in between straight and swung. To cover for this and make it not as apparent, Palmer would open his hi-hat just a touch so the variation in feel wasn't as obvious to the layman. His list of recording credits reads like a who's who in early rock and roll, but to me, his most notable contributions can be found with Fats Domino and Little Richard. Check out the album Here's Little Richard. Some killer cuts. I believe Palmer is on all of them except for tracks 2 and 12. Next we've got the legendary, the notorious DJ Fontana. Hailing out of Shreveport, Louisiana, he was the house drummer for the radio and later TV show Louisiana Hayride. Dominic Joseph Fontana is best known for his work with Elvis Presley at the start of his career. He played with Elvis for over 14 years and played on over 460 RCA cuts with Elvis. Like Earl Palmer, DJ helped write the blueprint for what rock and roll drumming would sound like with cuts like Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, Blue Suede Shoes, Love Me Tender, and more. A huge influence to up-and-comers like Ringo Starr and Charlie Watts. In the 1970s, DJ became known as a Nashville session ace, playing with the likes of Ringo Starr, Johnny Cash, Paul McCartney, Dolly Parton, and many more. Check out the self-titled album by Elvis Presley from 1956 for some of DJ's playing. The tracks that Fontana is not playing on that album are I Love You Because, Just Because, Trying to Get to You, I'll Never Let You Go, Little Darlin', and Blue Moon. This guy. If you want to talk about greatest of all time, Hal Blaine is right up there with the greatest. Widely known as one of the most recorded drummers in history, he claims 35,000 sessions, 6,000 singles, is featured on 150 US top 10 hits, and has 40 #1 tracks to his credit. Unbelievable. He moved to Cali in 1943 and became a member of the famed Wrecking Crew group of studio musicians, and was one of the key components of Phil Spector's wall of sound that he would become known for. Be sure to check out their documentary. One track of note from that time was the Ronettes' cut, Be My Baby. This beat would go on to be imitated quite a bit. He was responsible for inspiring an entire generation of future rock drummers. The Beach Boys, the Mamas and the Papas, Elvis, the Byrds, Sonny and Cher, and tons more. Albums to listen to. I mean, man, this one is hard. He wasn't the only drummer, but you simply can't skip the album Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. I was listening to it on the record player just yesterday while I was working around the studio. Others would be Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel, and If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears by the Mamas and the Papas. Next up, we got one maybe you didn't expect, Brian Bennett. We need to mention Brian as a representative of the British rock and roll scene that was happening at this same time. We're very familiar with the British Invasion bands that made it huge here in the States, but at the same time, they had a killer, vibrant scene going on there as well. He started playing professionally around 1956 at the age of 16 with a skiffle group there in Ramsgate. He moved back to London shortly thereafter and began a stint as the house drummer at the Two Eyes Coffee Bar and was a regular performer on Jack Good's TV show, Oh Boy. He moved on to a successful stint with Marty Wilde's Wildcats, and in October of 1961 joined his rocket to stardom, The Shadows. I mean, you gotta understand, The Shadows were Britain's first real superstar rock act, and their lineup would become the prototype lineup for rock bands everywhere. 2 guitars, bass, and drums. I mean, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, anyone? What made the Shadows lethal on 2 fronts was the fact that they often backed teen idol Cliff Richard, but could turn around and pack a venue with their own audience. Their concerts were riotous, sold out, and packed full of screaming fans. Very similar to what was happening in the States for other rock groups. Bennett went on to do a ton of session work with the likes of Olivia Newton-John and Al Stewart, as well as enjoy a second career as an award-winning film and television composer. Check out the Shadows album, Dance with the Shadows, for a really good example of Brian's drumming. And I know some of you are sitting there like, when's he gonna say it? When's he gonna say it? I'm gonna say it now. Ginger Baker. An emotionally volatile person, an explosive player, and an eccentric figure. Ginger Baker was all of these and more. His work in the 1960s and the 1970s earned him the title of rock's first superstar drummer. Baker was a jazz drummer at heart with influences like Baby Dodds, who is credited with coming up with the jazz ride cymbal pattern based off of his shimmy beat, Max Roach, and Art Blakey. By adding his touch of jazz technique to rock, he became probably what could be considered the first true jazz rock fusion drummer. In 1963, Baker formed the Graham Bond organization, made up of Baker, Jack Bruce, his longtime rhythm section partner, also playing with Baker in the group Cream, and Graham Bond. Jazz guitar great John McLaughlin also came through this group. In 1966, Baker left Graham Bond to form Cream with Eric Clapton. He became very well known for his double bass work and extensive drum solos. Later in the 70s, Baker moved to Africa to pursue his study and love of African music, often recording with Fela Kuti. Even though the mass public has given Baker less credit than he deserves, many great musicians consider him to be the greatest rock and roll drummer of all time. You'll hear this about several of the players on this list. Check out the Cream album, Disraeli Gears, and for an additional cut, check out the last cut on Cream's debut album, Fresh Cream, called Toad. You know we've got to include him. Richard Starkey is his real name, the famed drummer for the Beatles, Ringo Starr. Like the other members of the Beatles, Richard became interested in a type of music called skiffle. You'll remember that another one of our drummers of British descent, Brian Bennett, was also in the skiffle scene. Skiffle is a musical genre with influences from jazz, blues, and American folk music, and was performed with a mixture of manufactured and homemade instruments. It was originated in the United States in the early part of the 20th century and became extremely popular in the UK in the 1950s. In 1957, Ringo started his own skiffle group called the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group. Over the next few years, he bounced around to other skiffle groups, as you do in the skiffle scene, and earned his stage name Ringo Starr because of all the rings he would wear. In 1962, Ringo replaced Pete Best in the Beatles lineup, and the rest is history. Not only was he the drummer for the Beatles, Ringo has also gone on to lead a successful solo career, as well as working with artists like Elton John, Harry Nilsson, Peter Frampton, Steven Tyler, Tom Petty, and even Ozzy Osbourne. Some songs to check out with this drumming would be Paperback Writer, Rain, Hello Goodbye, and I Want to Hold Your Hand. Abbey Road and Let It Be are also 2 great albums. And now one who for a lot of you, you're like, is he gonna include him? And for some of you, you're like, who the heck is he? Roger Hawkins. During this time, you had multiple groups of studio musicians across the United States that began working together on a lot of sessions, often under some very primitive conditions. Those musicians would develop a sound used on many hit records. We've already talked about the Wrecking Crew out of California with Hal Blaine. For that Motown sound, you had the Funk Brothers out of Detroit between 1959 and 1972. For rock and roll, another group of studio musicians that helped to develop that new big beat sound, a sort of supersized groove created by the rhythm sections of that time, came out of Muscle Shoals, Alabama. This was the Muscle Shoals rhythm section, or the Swampers as many people began to refer to them. They mixed elements of soul, rock, R&B, and country with the laid-back mood and feel of the Deep South. They not only recorded hit albums, they went on the road with acts like Eric Clapton and Traffic. They later founded and began operating their own recording studio called Muscle Shoals Sound Studio, becoming the first rhythm section to own their own recording studio, and later their own publishing and production companies. The list of artists they helped attract to Muscle Shoals, Alabama is a who's who. Aretha Franklin, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, Cat Stevens, Boz Scaggs, Joe Crocker, Paul Simon, Bob Seger, Rod Stewart, and Willie Nelson, just to name a few. And now for an album to listen to his playing, listen to Money and Cigarettes by Eric Clapton. It's so hard not to say this about every drummer on this list, but this cat, his pocket is undeniable. Jim Keltner. A rock studio legend with a jazz background, he was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1942. Keltner is a complete chameleon and has been called the leading session drummer in America. He's known for his tastefulness and loose feel. In addition to his frequent work with the Beatles members George Harrison, John Lennon, and Ringo Starr on their various solo projects, Jim's list of recording credits reads like a who's who. Leon Russell, Gabor Szabo, Delaney Bramlett, Roy Orbison, Harry Nilsson, Jerry Garcia, Eric Clapton, Steely Dan, Joe Cocker, Van Dyke, Parks, The Rolling Stones, Ronnie Wood, Bill Wyman, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Brian Wilson, Seals and Crofts, The Ramones, Bill Frisell, Neil Young, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Yes, I'm gonna keep going because this is incredible. Phil Keggy, Steve Jones, Crowded House, Fiona Apple, Elvis Costello, The Bee Gees, Jackson Browne, The Manhattan Transfer, Randy Newman, I'm gonna keep going, Ry Cooder, Sam Phillips, Los Lobos, Pink Floyd, Warren Zevon, Rufus Wainwright, Tom Petty, Gillian Welch, this is so incredible, the Steve Miller Band, Alice Cooper, Sheryl Crow, and Lucinda Williams, and that's just naming some of them. He also specialized in R&B, influencing the likes of Jeff Porcaro and Danny Serafini of the band Chicago. To listen to, okay, man, where to start? He was a session drummer, so many albums will feature him as well as other drummers. One album that is great that he played on all but one song, I believe, is John Lennon's Walls and Bridges album. I also love his work with Fiona Apple. The man, the myth, the legend, Keith Moon. Never predictable, always unique, explosive, eccentric, and often self-destructive behavior, Mr. Keith Moon was all of that and more. Born in 1946 and not taking up the drums until the early 60s, Moon joined The Who in 1964, and the rest is, as they say, rock and roll history. Well known as one of the first rock drummers to regularly use double bass, Ginger Baker would be another, as well as Ronnie Tutt, not on this list, but an equally important player in the rock scene, playing for 12 years with Elvis Presley and 30 years with Neil Diamond, among many others. In addition to double bass, his playing emphasized tom-toms, cymbal crashes, and lots of drum fills. A Rolling Stone Reader's Poll voted him as the second greatest drummer of all time. And as a humorous side note, Moon was fascinated by blowing up toilets with cherry bombs, destroying TV sets, and was well known for his destructive behavior amongst hotels. Moon unfortunately died of a drug overdose in 1978. Two great Who albums to check out Keith Moon on. It would be Quadrophenia and Live at Leeds. Next we have Mitch Mitchell, a child actor early on, and although his drumming career is peppered with many other groups and musical exploitations, Mitch Mitchell is best known for his work with Jimi Hendrix. He had the explosiveness of Keith Moon with the finesse of Elvin Jones. Mitchell was the person Hendrix had the most important and sustained creative relationship with, both on stage and in the studio. Mitchell auditioned for the band being formed around Hendrix in late 1966, beating out many of the top young players in London, including Ainsley Dunbar. Dunbar later worked with Frank Zappa, Jeff Beck, David Bowie, Sammy Hagar, and a slew of others. Check out the Jimi Hendrix Experience album, Are You Experienced, to hear some incredible playing by Mitch. And one that many of you might tilt your head at, Carmine Appice. This list, in my humble opinion, would not be complete without Carmine. No matter how you pronounce his name, Appice or Appice, his influence on rock music and rock drummers can't be stated enough. He was a classically trained drummer who was influenced early on by Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa. Starting in 1967, Carmine was a member of the band that is widely considered to be the first heavy rock band, Vanilla Fudge. They're also considered to be the American links between psychedelia and heavy metal. Check out their rendition of You Keep Me Hanging On to see exactly what I'm talking about. You have to understand, before that time, this heaviness, that wall of sound, it had never been heard on that level. He was an incredible showman, known worldwide for his astonishing live shows, who also became a sought-after studio musician. In 1976, he beat out 40 other drummers in auditioning for Rod Stewart's band. In addition to being an incredible drummer, he wrote multiple chart toppers with Stewart. Of particular note, Do You Think I'm Sexy, which has the best bass line ever, and Young Turks. So his influence, that's one of the main reasons he's on this list. He is said to have influenced Iron Maiden's Nicko McBrain, Aerosmith's Joey Kramer, Roger Taylor of Queen, Phil Collins of Genesis, Rush's Neil Peart, Tommy Lee from Motley Crue, Slayer's Dave Lombardo, John Bonham of Led Zeppelin, Ian Pace of Deep Purple, Eric Singer of Kiss, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. He's worked with a wide range of artists like Stanley Clarke, Jeff Beck, Ozzy Osbourne, Ted Nugent, and Pink Floyd. He was also, of particular interest to me as I'm an educator as well, he was also one of the first to legitimize rock drumming in the field of education with his 1972 best-selling book, over 300,000 copies sold of a drum instructional book, Realistic Rock. In addition, he was the first drummer to conduct clinics at college campuses and music stores and theaters, clinics which still managed to break attendance records. For a great listen to see why he was such a huge influence on the scene, check out the self-titled album from the band Vanilla Fudge. If you follow this channel for any length of time, you know I love John Bonham. His power, his finesse, his pocket, his energy, the human element that came through his playing. Bonham joined Page and the New Yardbirds around 1968, later to change their name to Led Zeppelin. Every member of that band said they wouldn't have been half of what they were without Bonham. His right foot still baffles players around the world. His fast triplets were the stuff of legends, two instantly identifiable features of his playing. He influenced an entire generation of players and is widely hailed as one of the greatest drummers of all time, of which I 100% agree. Unfortunately, Bonham died far too soon from drug-related causes. After a 12-hour alcohol drinking binge, he fell unconscious and died of aspiration of his own vomit. He had consumed an incredible 40 units of vodka. Check out any of the Led Zeppelin albums to hear Bonham's incredible drumming. A couple of note would be Led Zeppelin 4 and Physical Graffiti. A name most of you probably already know, but some of you maybe not for his drumming. Phil Collins. Obviously, Phil is a pop music icon at this point, but before his singing artist career, he was a drummer first, starting with his first band, Flaming Youth, who released one album in 1969. He then snagged the drum chair for the British art rock band Genesis in 1970 while continuing a separate jazz career with Brand X at the same time. Peter Gabriel abruptly left the group in 1974, and after auditioning over 400 singers, they let Collins have a go at it, and the rest is history. His career has been long-standing and continuing to this day. He also has the distinction of playing what is probably the most air-drummed fill in history, the intro fill when the drums come in on the song In the Air Tonight. Check out the Genesis album Selling England by the Pound for some classic Phil Collins drumming and to understand why he's on this list. Unfortunately, we recently lost this giant. Nicknamed the Professor by many drummers, he has been arguably the most consistently popular drummer in recent times. Yes, I'm talking about Neil Peart. Joining the Canadian rock band Rush in July of 1974 as their drummer and lyricist, he was known worldwide for his finesse, ingenuity, originality, drum solos, incredible speed, insane accuracy, and so much more. He was also an accomplished writer, authoring 4 books, of which I think I have all of them, Ghostwriter and Traveling Music being my 2 favorites. Without a doubt, you need to start with the Rush album, Moving Pictures. Almost every song on this album is a banger. This next cat was voted by Modern Drummer as one of the top 25 drummers of all time. I'm talking about Steve Smith. Steve is well known in the rock world for his work with the band Journey. He began drumming at the age of 9, attended Berklee College of Music in Boston between 1972 and 76, studying under Alan Dawson and Gary Chaffee. As a side note and a shameless plug, one of my former teachers also studied with both of them, and another one of my former teachers studied with Alan Dawson as well. From 1978 to 1985, he was the drummer for Journey. He returned and rejoined the band in both 1995 and 2015. In addition to his drumming with Journey, Steve has had an incredible career playing jazz, fusion, and world music with his own band, Vital Information, and other groups. He's also been active on the education front with instructional DVDs and clinics. For some of Steve's rock playing, check out the Journey album, Escape. And again, on another personal side note, I just got to play a Journey review show with a 30-piece orchestra and a rock band, and it was amazing to dig through Steve's playing and see all of the parts that he created in that band. And now we come to Stuart Copeland. Again, one of my personal faves. I know I've said that about several of them. Ranked number 10 as one of Rolling Stone's 100 greatest drummers of all time. He was the son of a CIA agent who spent his formative years in the Middle East, later attended college in California, and then settled in London in 1975, drumming for progressive rock band Curved Air. Shortly thereafter, he founded The Police with Sting, and after their first hit Roxanne in 1979, skyrocketed as one of the most popular and innovative bands of the post-punk era. By masterfully weaving rock, reggae, funk, and world rhythms together, Copeland still has one of the most identifiable sounds of any drummer to ever sit behind the instrument. If you like Stewart's playing, another drummer to check out from that time period is Topper Headon of The Clash. He has a style that's every bit as unique as Stewart's and is in the same vein. The Police disbanded at the top of their popularity in 1983, and Copeland has gone on to have an extremely successful career as a composer for film, television, and video games. Check out the Police albums Ghost in the Machine and Synchronicity for some great, classic, timeless Copeland playing. Some of you will disagree with me including this drummer on this list. Yay, some of you will even maybe stop the video, but I gotta include him. Dave Grohl. Most of you probably don't need me to tell you who he is or what he's done. And if you don't think he needs to be on this list, well, I completely disagree. Dave Grohl was the longest serving drummer for the band Nirvana from 1990 to 1994. Nirvana helped launch an entire style of rock music as well as become the spearhead for an entire youth movement. I was born in 1981, so I actually got to be a part of this scene as it was happening, and it was every bit as revolutionary and felt every bit as big as people make it seem. After the suicide death of Kurt Cobain and disbanding of Nirvana, Dave Grohl, of course, founded the band Foo Fighters. He's the guitar player, singer, and chief songwriter of that group, as well as sharing drum recording responsibilities for a very long time with now deceased drummer Taylor Hawkins. He drummed for the supergroup Them Crooked Vultures, recorded and toured with Queens of the Stone Age, and has multiple solo projects, Probot being my fave. In addition to all of these projects, Grohl is also well sought after as a studio musician. I'm telling you, if you want to see accuracy in playing in the studio, you need to look at some of Grohl's raw tracks that were recorded to tape. Incredible, you can't fake that stuff. Check out the album Songs for the Deaf by Queens of the Stone Age, as well as the self-titled album from the supergroup Them Crooked Vultures with Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age and John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin. This next one has recently been in the limelight. He took Taylor Hawkins' spot when Taylor unexpectedly passed away. Talking about Josh Freese. This is a current drummer that is still killing it on the scene and had to be pulled from a very large gig to join the Foo Fighters. Born to a musical family, Josh began his professional career at age 12 in a top 40 band at Disneyland, and his touring recording career at age 15 with first Dweezil Zappa and then the Vandals. He's a permanent member of the bands The Vandals and Devo, and I do believe Foo Fighters now. He worked with Guns N' Roses from 1997 to 2000, A Perfect Circle from 1999 to 2012, Nine Inch Nails from 2005 to 2008, Weezer from 2009 to 2011, toured with Paramore on their South American tour in 2010, and returned to playing with Sting full-time in 2016. He had toured and recorded with him before in 2005. Josh is an in-demand studio player and has appeared on over 400 records. Check out A Perfect Circle's album 13th Step. And due to my punk rock roots, I'm also partial to his work with the Vandals.